The boarding pass. Naomi Evans adjusted the strap of her oversized tote bag as she stepped into the jet bridge, her 6-year-old daughter Ella skipping a little to keep up. The low hum of the aircraft's engines ahead reminded her of the countless flights she'd taken before. But this one was different. She was now 7 months pregnant, traveling for a much-anticipated family reunion, and had splurged on first-class tickets for herself and Ella, a decision that felt both practical and indulgent. Comfort was paramount. Navigating an airport while carrying a child in her womb and another by her side was no small feat. Ella tugged at Naomi's hand, her bright eyes darting around. "Mommy, is this the plane we're taking?" she asked, her voice a mix of excitement and wonder. "Yes, sweetie," Naomi replied with a soft smile. "We're sitting right at the front this time. You're going to love it." As they reached the aircraft door, Naomi offered her boarding pass to the flight attendant, a tall woman with a neat blonde bun and a sharp navy blue uniform. The attendant's name tag read Cheryl. Her expression barely shifted as she scanned Naomi from head to toe, a brief flicker of hesitation that Naomi didn't miss. Cheryl took the boarding pass, her eyebrows knitting together. "First class?" she asked, her tone neutral, but tinged with incredulity. Naomi kept her voice steady. "Yes, that's correct." Cheryl glanced at the pass again, then back at Naomi, her eyes lingering a second too long. Ella, sensing the subtle tension, clung closer to her mother. Naomi offered a reassuring squeeze of her daughter's hand, maintaining her calm. "I'll need to double-check this," Cheryl said, stepping aside to confer with another attendant. Naomi's pulse quickened. Double-check? She had booked these tickets weeks ago, meticulously planning every detail of this trip. Her name was printed clearly on the boarding pass, and her seat assignment, 1A and 1B, left no room for doubt. She reminded herself to stay composed. She was no stranger to these subtle challenges, the silent accusations, cloaked in formality. Ella tugged at her mother's dress. "Why is she taking so long, Mommy?" "It's okay, sweetheart," Naomi said, her voice soothing, despite the growing knot in her stomach. "Sometimes people make mistakes. They'll fix it." When Cheryl returned, her expression had shifted slightly, more guarded now. "Please follow me," she said, motioning toward the cabin. Naomi hesitated, her instinct telling her to ask more questions, but she chose not to create a scene. She stepped forward, Ella in tow, and moved down the narrow aisle toward their seats. The first-class cabin was pristine, with wide leather seats and plush headrests. Naomi settled Ella into her window seat and stowed their bags overhead. Just as she lowered herself into her own seat, Cheryl reappeared, this time with 2 uniformed police officers, behind her. "Ma'am, I need you to step off the plane for further verification," Cheryl said, her voice firm now. Naomi froze. The weight of the moment sank heavily onto her chest, and she felt every pair of eyes in the cabin turn toward her. Ella's small voice broke the silence. "Mommy, what's happening?" Naomi leaned down to meet her daughter's worried gaze. "Stay here for a moment, okay? Mommy will be right back." Turning to Cheryl, she asked, "What seems to be the issue?" Cheryl crossed her arms. "We need to confirm your boarding pass and identification. Please come with us." Naomi felt the sting of humiliation rising, but she kept her composure. Standing tall, she followed the officers back up the aisle, feeling the burn of judgmental stares. The whispers began almost immediately. Once they were outside the aircraft, Naomi handed over her boarding pass and ID to the officers. The air was cool, but Naomi felt the heat of anger bubbling beneath her calm exterior. She watched as the officers inspected the documents, their brows furrowing. "Ma'am, these documents are perfectly valid," one of them finally said, glancing toward Cheryl with a raised eyebrow. Cheryl looked momentarily flustered but quickly masked it with a professional demeanor. "I just wanted to ensure everything was in order," she said, her voice defensive. Naomi's jaw tightened. "I don't understand. I showed my pass to you earlier. What exactly led you to involve the police?" Cheryl avoided her gaze. Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. What's going on here? It was the flight supervisor, a man with salt and pepper hair and an authoritative presence. He glanced at the group and immediately seemed to understand the situation. Naomi stepped forward, her voice firm but calm. I was asked to leave the plane so my documents could be verified. The officers have confirmed that everything is valid. I'd like to know why I was singled out. The supervisor turned to Cheryl. Do you care to explain this? Cheryl fumbled for words. I just thought it was unusual. Unusual? Naomi interjected. Because I'm a black woman in first class? Cheryl's face reddened, but she didn't respond. The supervisor's expression hardened. Ms. Evans, I sincerely apologize for this incident. Please allow me to escort you back to your seat. And her? Naomi asked, gesturing toward Cheryl. The supervisor paused, then turned to Cheryl. I need you to step into my office. We'll discuss this matter further. The officer stepped aside as Naomi followed the supervisor back onto the plane. She felt the eyes of passengers on her again, but this time, she held her head high. She returned to her seat, where Ella was waiting, her wide eyes filled with concern. Everything's fine, sweetheart, Naomi said, leaning down to kiss her daughter's forehead. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the whispers began again, this time not about Naomi, but about Cheryl. Passengers exchanged incredulous looks as the supervisor escorted Cheryl off the plane, her shoulders stiff and her head bowed. Moments later, an announcement came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the earlier disruption. Our flight will be departing shortly. Naomi exhaled deeply, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. Ella leaned against her side, her small frame warm and reassuring. Mommy, are we going to see Grandma soon? Ella asked, her voice sleepy now. Yes, baby, Naomi whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. We're going to see Grandma very soon. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Naomi closed her eyes, replaying the events in her mind. She wasn't surprised by what had happened, but she was tired of always having to prove her worth, tired of the silent battles she fought every day. Still, she resolved not to let this moment define her or ruin the trip. This was just the beginning of a story she hoped would teach her daughter, and anyone else watching, a lesson in resilience and dignity. Little did Naomi know, this incident would spark a conversation that would reach far beyond the confines of the airplane cabin. Naomi sat in her seat, gazing out of the window as the plane ascended into the skies. Her reflection on the glass mirrored a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. Ella had fallen asleep beside her, clutching her favorite stuffed animal, a floppy-eared bunny named Milo. The innocence on her daughter's face was a balm to Naomi's frayed nerves, a reminder of why she endured so much with quiet strength. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but Naomi's mind replayed the earlier scene like a relentless loop. She thought of Cheryl's gaze, sharp with suspicion, and the humiliation of being escorted off the plane in front of strangers. Her heart ached, not just for herself, but for Ella, who had witnessed it all. How much longer could she shield her daughter from the reality of the world they lived in? The flight attendant serving first class, a young man with a warm smile and an easy manner, approached Naomi with a tray. His name tag read Liam. Ms. Evans, he said gently, his voice breaking into her thoughts. Would you like something to drink? Maybe a snack for your daughter when she wakes up? Naomi hesitated, then nodded. Some water, please. And something light for her would be great. Liam nodded and returned moments later with a bottle of water and a small plate of fruit. As he set it down on Naomi's tray table, he lingered for a moment, his expression apologetic. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened earlier, he said in a low voice. It wasn't right. Naomi looked up at him, surprised by his sincerity. Thank you, she said softly. It means a lot to hear that. Liam hesitated, as if weighing whether to say more. You're not alone in this. A lot of us saw what happened, and we're on your side. Naomi's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to find the right words, and Liam gave her a small, encouraging smile before moving on to the next passenger. For the first time since boarding the plane, Naomi felt a glimmer of hope. Not everyone turned a blind eye to injustice. Some people cared enough to speak up, even in small ways. As the hours passed, Naomi tried to distract herself with a book she'd brought, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the incident. What bothered her most was the lingering question, why? Why had Cheryl assumed the worst about her? Was it her skin color? Her pregnancy? Or was it simply the weight of stereotypes and biases that had been ingrained in Cheryl's mind for years? Naomi wished she could confront Cheryl, not with anger, but with the hope of understanding and changing perspectives. Ella stirred beside her, rubbing her eyes as she woke up. "Mommy, are we there yet?" "Not yet, sweetie," Naomi said, brushing a strand of hair from Ella's face. "We've got a little while to go." Ella sat up and reached for the plate of fruit, nibbling on a slice of apple. "Why were the police here earlier?" she asked suddenly, her innocent question cutting through Naomi's defenses. Naomi took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, people make mistakes, Ella. They don't always understand things the way they should." Ella frowned. "But you didn't do anything wrong." "No, I didn't," Naomi said, her voice steady. "But it's important to stay calm and show them the truth. That's how we make things better." Ella seemed to accept this answer, though Naomi knew it was far from the whole truth. How could she explain systemic racism to a 6-year-old? How could she prepare her daughter for a world that might one day look at her with the same suspicion Cheryl had shown? Naomi resolved to teach Ella the strength and resilience she'd learned over the years, even if it meant shielding her from the harsher realities for now. The flight continued smoothly, and Naomi began to relax, though the weight of the earlier events lingered. She noticed passengers sneaking glances at her from time to time, some with curiosity, others with sympathy. She chose to ignore them, focusing instead on Ella, who had started drawing in her notebook. The sight of her daughter's small hand gripping a crayon brought a smile to Naomi's face. As the plane began its descent, the intercom crackled to life, and the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. On behalf of the crew, we'd like to thank you for choosing to fly with us today." Naomi felt a wave of relief. She couldn't wait to step off the plane and leave this experience behind. She just wanted to see her family, to hug her mother and feel the comfort of home. When the plane touched down, the passengers began to gather their belongings, and Naomi helped Ella with her small backpack. Liam reappeared, assisting Naomi with her carry-on bag. As they exited the plane, he gave her a quick nod, his eyes conveying unspoken support. The airport terminal was bustling, the usual chaos of travelers rushing to their gates or reuniting with loved ones. Naomi spotted her mother waiting near the baggage claim, her face lighting up as she saw them. "Mom!" Naomi called, waving. Her mother, Gloria, rushed forward, enveloping both Naomi and Ella in a warm embrace. "My girls," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm so glad you're here." Naomi felt a lump rise in her throat as she hugged her mother tightly. "We missed you." Gloria pulled back, studying Naomi's face. "What's wrong? You look upset." Naomi hesitated, then decided to tell her mother everything. As they waited for their luggage, she recounted the events on the plane, her voice steady but laced with frustration. Gloria listened intently, her expression darkening with each detail. "That's unacceptable," Gloria said firmly. "I'm so proud of you for handling it the way you did, but something needs to be done. People can't keep getting away with this." Naomi nodded, though she wasn't sure what something looked like. She just wanted to move forward, to focus on the time she had with her family. As they drove to Gloria's house, the familiar streets brought a sense of comfort. The neighborhood was filled with memories, playing outside as a child, family barbecues, and the unwavering support of her community. It was a stark contrast to the hostility she'd faced earlier that day. Here, she was surrounded by love and acceptance. That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Naomi found herself opening up about her experience again. Her cousins, aunts, and uncles listened with a mix of outrage and understanding. They shared their own stories of prejudice and discrimination, their voices weaving a tapestry of resilience and defiance. Her uncle James, a retired lawyer, leaned forward, his tone serious. "You have a platform now, Naomi. People saw what happened. You can use this to make a difference." Naomi considered his words. She'd always been private, preferring to keep her struggles to herself. But this felt different. It wasn't just about her, it was about Ella and every other child who deserved to grow up in a world free from prejudice. Later that night, after Ella had fallen asleep, Naomi sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. She drafted a letter to the airline, detailing the events of the day and the impact it had on her and her daughter. She also reached out to a local journalist she trusted, someone who had covered issues of racial bias in the past. As she typed, Naomi felt a sense of purpose she hadn't expected. The day's events had been painful, but they had also ignited a spark within her. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for a future where Ella and other children wouldn't have to face the same struggles. By the time she closed her laptop, Naomi felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She didn't know what the outcome would be, but she knew she was doing the right thing. As she climbed into bed, she whispered a silent prayer for strength and courage. The next morning, Naomi woke to find her email inbox flooded with messages. The journalist had published her story, and it was already gaining traction. Social media was ablaze with discussions about the incident, with many people expressing outrage and support. Naomi felt a mix of emotions, gratitude for the support, but also a deep responsibility. This was just the beginning. She didn't know where this journey would lead, but she was determined to see it through. For Ella. For herself. For everyone who had ever been made to feel less than they were. The following days unfolded like a whirlwind for Naomi. What had started as a personal ordeal had transformed into a public spectacle. The story of her confrontation with the flight attendant had struck a chord with people far beyond her immediate circle. By the second morning after her arrival, her inbox was overwhelmed with emails from reporters, activists, and even strangers offering their support. Social media hashtags like #FlyWithDignity and #JusticeForNaomi were trending, drawing attention to the broader issue of racial bias in customer service. Naomi sat at her mother's kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. Ella played quietly in the next room, her laughter drifting through the house as she colored with her cousins. Naomi's fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant yet determined. She had been invited to share her experience on a popular talk show. It was an opportunity to amplify her voice, to shed light on what had happened, not just to her but to countless others who had faced similar injustices. "Are you sure you're ready for this, baby?" Gloria asked, sitting across from her. Her mother's eyes were warm but concerned. Naomi exhaled deeply, brushing a hand over her belly. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "But I know it's something I have to do. If I don't speak up now, what kind of example am I setting for Ella?" Gloria reached out and took Naomi's hand, squeezing it gently. "You're stronger than you think, Naomi. You've always been strong. And this? This is bigger than you. It's about changing something that's been wrong for far too long." Naomi nodded, her resolve hardening. That afternoon, she replied to the talk show's producer, agreeing to appear. Within hours, travel arrangements were made, and she was scheduled to fly out the next morning. The irony of boarding another flight so soon wasn't lost on her, but this time, she felt more prepared, armed with both her truth and the support of countless people who believed in her. When the morning arrived, Naomi found herself sitting in the terminal with Ella by her side. This time, her boarding process was smooth and uneventful. No suspicious glances, no unnecessary delays. It was almost as if the universe was trying to reassure her that not every flight would carry the weight of her last experience. The flight landed in Los Angeles, and Naomi was whisked away to the studio. The bustle of producers, assistants, and makeup artists was overwhelming, but she focused on Ella, who was in awe of the bright lights and bustling activity. A kind assistant offered to watch Ella during the show, giving Naomi a moment to collect herself backstage. The host, a well-known journalist named Samantha Blake, met Naomi before the cameras rolled. Samantha's reputation for tackling hard-hitting topics with empathy and insight had been one of the reasons Naomi had agreed to the interview. "Naomi, I just want to thank you for coming here today," Samantha said, her handshake firm yet warm. "Your story has resonated with so many people, and I think it's because it's not just about one incident. It's about something much bigger." Naomi nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "That's why I'm here," she said. "It's not just about me. It's about the patterns we see over and over again, and how we need to break them." Moments later, Naomi was seated under the bright studio lights, the cameras rolling. Samantha began with a recap of the incident, showing a brief video clip from a passenger who had recorded the confrontation. Watching it on the screen made Naomi's chest tighten, but she forced herself to stay composed. "Naomi," Samantha began, "what was going through your mind when you were asked to step off the plane?" Naomi took a deep breath before responding. "At first, I was confused. I had done everything right, bought the tickets, checked in, presented my boarding pass. But then, as things escalated, I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was about perception, how someone saw me and made assumptions about who I was and what I deserved." Samantha nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You sparked a larger conversation about implicit bias and how it manifests in everyday situations. How does it feel to be at the center of that?" "It's overwhelming," Naomi admitted. "I never intended to be in this position. But if my experience can help someone else, if it can make people think twice about their own biases, then it's worth it." The interview delved deeper, touching on Naomi's experiences as a Black woman, her hopes for her daughter, and the broader systemic issues that perpetuate discrimination. By the time the camera stopped rolling, Naomi felt both drained and invigorated. She had laid bare her truth for the world to see, and it felt like a step towards something greater. As the show aired later that evening, Naomi's phone buzzed incessantly with messages of support. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers reached out to commend her bravery. The airline, which had initially issued a vague apology, released a more detailed statement, pledging to review their training protocols and address implicit bias among their staff. But for Naomi, the real victory came in the quiet moments, like when Ella climbed into her lap that night, wrapping her small arms around her mother's neck. "Mommy, I'm proud of you," Ella said, her voice sleepy but sincere. Naomi's eyes filled with tears as she held her daughter close. "Thank you, baby. That means everything to me." Over the next few weeks, Naomi's story continued to make waves. She was invited to speak at community events, universities, and corporate seminars. Each time, she shared her experience with honesty and vulnerability, emphasizing the importance of empathy, awareness, and action. She also began working with advocacy groups focused on combating discrimination in travel and hospitality. Together, they developed initiatives to educate employees on recognizing and addressing bias, creating safer and more inclusive environments for all travelers. As the months passed, Naomi's life began to settle back into a rhythm. Her pregnancy progressed smoothly, and she prepared for the arrival of her second child, a boy she planned to name Elijah. The nursery, painted in soothing shades of blue and green, became a symbol of hope and new beginnings. One evening, as Naomi sat rocking Ella to sleep, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the airline's CEO, inviting her to join a newly formed advisory board focused on diversity and inclusion. Naomi smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had led to meaningful change. Looking down at Ella, now fast asleep, Naomi whispered, "This is for you, my love. And for everyone who deserves better." As the room grew quiet, Naomi allowed herself a moment of reflection. The fight wasn't over, but she had taken the first steps. And with each new day, she felt more certain that the world she was helping to shape would be one where her children, and all children, could thrive without fear or prejudice. The months that followed Naomi's television appearance were a whirlwind of transformation, challenge, and quiet triumph. Her story, once an isolated incident aboard a flight, had grown into a catalyst for national conversation. Advocacy groups, corporate leaders, and even policymakers began to reach out, each seeking Naomi's voice to amplify their calls for equity and justice. She found herself at the center of a movement she hadn't anticipated, but one she embraced wholeheartedly. The airline's advisory board, which Naomi had agreed to join, became one of the most tangible platforms for her advocacy. She attended monthly meetings, sometimes in person, sometimes virtually, where executives, diversity experts, and other stakeholders gathered to discuss actionable ways to address implicit bias within the company. Naomi's contributions were grounded in her lived experiences, but she also came armed with research and insights, determined to make the most of this opportunity. During one particularly heated meeting, a senior executive expressed resistance to implementing mandatory bias training for all employees. "We can't afford to shut down operations for a day to train thousands of staff," he argued. "The logistics alone would be a nightmare." Naomi, sitting at the far end of the long conference table, leaned forward, her calm demeanor belying the fire in her voice. "What you can't afford," she said, "is another incident like mine, or worse. The cost of lawsuits, public outrage, and lost customer trust will far outweigh the investment in education and prevention. This isn't just about logistics. It's about doing what's right." The room fell silent, and the executive shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Others nodded in agreement, and by the end of the meeting, the board had voted to implement a phased training program, starting with the flight crew and extending to all customer-facing staff. Naomi left the meeting feeling a sense of accomplishment, but also acutely aware of the long road ahead. Change, she had come to learn, was rarely swift or straightforward. It required persistence, patience, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Back home, Naomi's personal life was evolving in parallel with her public one. Her pregnancy had reached its final stages, and Elijah was due any day. Ella, ever the curious and observant child, often peppered Naomi with questions about her work. "Mommy, why do people have to learn not to be mean?" she asked one evening as they worked on a puzzle together. Naomi paused, considering how to explain such a complex issue in terms a 6-year-old could understand. "Sometimes, people don't realize they're being mean, baby," she said gently. "They've learned to see the world in a certain way, and it's our job to help them see it differently." Ella nodded thoughtfully, her small hands placing a puzzle piece into position. "I think you're good at helping people see." Naomi smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Thank you, sweetie. I'm trying." As her due date approached, Naomi decided to take a step back from public appearances, focusing instead on preparing for Elijah's arrival. She declined several speaking engagements and postponed a planned trip to Washington, D.C., where she had been invited to participate in a panel on systemic racism in the travel industry. While she was passionate about her advocacy, she knew she needed to prioritize her health and her family. Elijah's birth was a moment of pure joy. On a crisp autumn morning, Naomi held her newborn son in her arms, marveling at his tiny fingers and the soft cooing sounds he made as he slept. Gloria and Ella were by her side, their faces radiant with love and excitement. In that moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude. But even as Naomi adjusted to life with a newborn, the movement she had sparked continued to grow. Activists and community leaders who had been inspired by her story carried the torch, organizing rallies, workshops, and campaigns aimed at dismantling systemic bias. Naomi received updates from her colleagues on the advisory board, who reported progress on several initiatives, including the rollout of bias training and the establishment of a customer feedback task force. One evening, as Naomi rocked Elijah to sleep, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a passenger who had been on the same flight as Naomi during the infamous incident. The woman, a middle-aged schoolteacher named Clara, had written to share how witnessing Naomi's calm strength had changed her perspective. "I realized that I've been complicit in these moments by staying silent," Clara wrote. "Your courage inspired me to speak up the next time I saw something wrong. Thank you for showing me what it means to stand tall." Naomi read the email twice, her emotions welling up. This was why she had chosen to share her story, despite the vulnerability it required. If even one person could be moved to act, to challenge injustice when they saw it, then all the pain and effort had been worth it. As the weeks turned into months, Naomi found a delicate balance between her roles as a mother, advocate, and advisor. She resumed her work with the airline, now focusing on the implementation of a mentorship program for employees from underrepresented backgrounds. The program aimed to create pathways for advancement and leadership, addressing not only bias, but also the systemic barriers that often prevented marginalized individuals from thriving. Naomi also began collaborating with other organizations outside the travel industry, sharing her insights on fostering inclusivity and accountability. She spoke at schools, emphasizing the importance of teaching empathy and critical thinking from a young age. Ella often accompanied her to these events, sitting proudly in the front row and beaming whenever her mother took the stage. Through it all, Naomi remained grounded by the support of her family and community. Gloria, ever the pillar of strength, provided guidance and encouragement, while Ella continued to remind Naomi of the simple joys in life. Elijah, now a bright-eyed infant, brought laughter and light into their home, his presence a constant reminder of the future Naomi was fighting to build. One evening, as Naomi tucked Ella into bed, her daughter looked up at her with wide, earnest eyes. "Mommy, do you think the world will be better when Elijah grows up?" Naomi leaned down, pressing a kiss to Ella's forehead. "I think it will be, because people like you and me are working to make it better." Ella smiled, her eyelids growing heavy with sleep. "I want to help, too," she murmured. Naomi's heart swelled with emotion as she watched her daughter drift off. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The road ahead was still long, but she was no longer walking it alone. With each step she took, she carried not just her own hopes, but the dreams of her children and the countless others who believed in the power of change. As she returned to the quiet of the living room, Naomi reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. What had started as a painful encounter on an airplane had transformed into a movement, one that was still evolving and growing. And while she couldn't predict what the future would hold, she knew one thing for certain: she would never stop fighting for a world where dignity, justice, and equality were more than just ideals, they were realities for everyone. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft orange glow over Naomi's quiet neighborhood. She sat on the porch of her home, wrapped in a light shawl, sipping tea while Elijah dozed peacefully in her arms. Ella was still asleep inside, curled up with her favorite stuffed bunny, and the stillness of the morning gave Naomi a rare moment of reflection. The past year had been transformative in ways she never imagined. She had gone from being a victim of an unjust act to becoming a voice for change, a symbol of resilience for so many who had endured similar experiences. Naomi's work with the airline's advisory board had begun bearing tangible results. The diversity and inclusion initiatives, which once faced resistance, were now being adopted across the company. Mandatory bias training had been successfully rolled out, and customer feedback mechanisms were revamped to ensure passengers had a safe way to report discriminatory behavior. More importantly, the airline had started celebrating stories of diversity and inclusion within their workforce, shining a spotlight on employees who championed equity and empathy. It was a step in the right direction, though Naomi knew the journey was far from over. Beyond the airline, Naomi had expanded her advocacy into broader initiatives. She collaborated with nonprofit organizations to develop training modules for companies across different industries, helping leaders identify and address implicit biases within their systems. She also worked with schools to create programs that taught children empathy, respect, and the value of diversity from a young age. Her days were often filled with meetings, planning sessions, and speaking engagements, but she made sure to reserve time for her family. After all, they were her inspiration for everything she did. One particular project had consumed much of Naomi's energy over the past few months: the launch of an initiative called Pathways to Equity, a nationwide program aimed at empowering individuals from marginalized communities to pursue leadership roles in their respective fields. The initiative provided mentorship, resources, and scholarships to help break the cycle of systemic barriers that often held people back. Naomi had poured her heart into the project, fueled by the belief that creating opportunities was the most effective way to dismantle long-standing inequities. The launch event for Pathways to Equity was just days away, and Naomi was set to deliver the keynote speech. As she prepared her remarks, she found herself reflecting on how far she had come, not just in her advocacy work, but in her personal growth. The incident on the plane, once a source of pain and humiliation, had become the foundation of her mission. It was a reminder of how even the most challenging experiences could be transformed into catalysts for positive change. The day of the launch arrived, and the event venue buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of attendees, including community leaders, corporate executives, and activists, had gathered to celebrate the initiative's debut. Naomi stood backstage, her heart racing as she glanced at the audience through a small curtain opening. She spotted Ella sitting in the front row next to Gloria, both of them beaming with pride. Taking a deep breath, Naomi stepped onto the stage, greeted by thunderous applause. The lights were bright, but she focused on the faces in the crowd, drawing strength from their energy. She began her speech by recounting the moment that had changed everything: the flight, the confrontation, and the decision to stand up for herself and others. As she spoke, her voice was steady, filled with conviction. "What happened to me was not an isolated incident," Naomi said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "It was a reflection of a deeper issue, one that touches every industry, every community, every corner of our society. But what I've learned over the past year is that we have the power to change the narrative. We can take our pain, our anger, and our frustration, and turn it into action." She went on to describe the vision behind Pathways to Equity, emphasizing the importance of creating spaces where everyone had a chance to succeed, regardless of their background. Her words were met with nods of agreement, murmurs of encouragement, and the occasional tear. By the time she finished, the audience rose to their feet, applauding with an intensity that left Naomi momentarily breathless. As the event continued, Naomi mingled with attendees, many of whom shared their own stories of resilience and triumph. One young woman, a recent college graduate, approached Naomi with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Evans, I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "Your story gave me the courage to stand up to my boss when I was being overlooked for promotions because of my race. I finally got the recognition I deserved, and it's because of people like you who pave the way." Naomi hugged the young woman, her heart swelling with gratitude. Every story like this reminded her of why she had chosen to step into the spotlight, despite the challenges and scrutiny that came with it. Later that evening, as Naomi returned home, she found herself reflecting on the ripple effects of her journey. The changes she had fought for, the programs, the conversations, the shifts in perception, were not just about her own experience. They were about building a better world for her children and for future generations. Ella greeted her at the door, throwing her arms around Naomi's waist. "Mommy, you were amazing," she exclaimed. "I want to do what you do when I grow up." Naomi knelt down, holding Ella close. "You can do anything you set your mind to, baby," she said. "And I'll be here to support you every step of the way." As the weeks turned into months, Naomi continued her work with renewed determination. The success of Pathways to Equity inspired similar initiatives in other industries, and Naomi was often called upon to provide guidance and support. She became a sought-after speaker at conferences and events, her voice a beacon of hope for those striving for change. But through it all, Naomi remained grounded in her role as a mother. She made time for family dinners, bedtime stories, and lazy Sunday mornings. She celebrated Ella's milestones, from school projects to dance recitals, and cherished every moment with Elijah, whose first steps brought tears of joy to her eyes. One evening, as Naomi tucked Elijah into bed, she sat by the window, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky. She thought about the road ahead, the battles yet to be fought, the hearts yet to be reached. The work was far from over, but Naomi was ready. She had found her purpose, and she knew that as long as she continued to speak her truth, she could help others find theirs. The incident on that flight had been a turning point, but it was not the end of Naomi's story. It was the beginning of a journey that would leave a lasting impact, not just on her own life, but on the lives of countless others. And as she closed her eyes that night, Naomi felt a deep sense of peace, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be.